it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Please make sure your phones and pagers are on stun, please. Stun. Here.
Phasers.
Item number 1, do we have any citizen concerns? Hearing none. Approval of the agenda. I move approval.
Second.
Motion by DeWitt, second by Taylor to approve today's agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item 3 and 8 constitute a consent agenda of routine action items to be considered by one motion. Items pass unanimously unless a separate vote is requested by a board member. Item 3 is approval of the minutes of the September 4, 2018 meeting. Number 4 is approval of claims. 5 is human resources. Item A, approval of memorandum of personnel transaction. And item 5B is authorization to initiate hiring. Item 6 is board administration. Approval of lifting tax suspension for petitioners who fail to recertify their income or income does not qualify for continued tax suspension. Item 7, County Auditor's Office. Approved cigarette permit for Heritage Express in Sloan, Iowa. Number 8, Secondary Roads, consideration of a utility permit for work in the right-of-way. I will move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion by DeWitt, second by Raddick. Any questions on the consent agenda? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item 9, Secondary Roads, Mr. Nera. Approved contract for route and crack seal project on HMA Road.
We have a contract for route and seal on HMA roads. This is to go out and work on Buchanan Avenue, 155th Street, and Old Highway 20. This is an area we recently overlaid, and some of those cracks begin to appear in that first winter. We want to make sure we get them sealed off and protect that pavement from further deterioration. I recommend approval of the contract with Sioux Commercial Sweeping of Sioux Center, Iowa, for $39,700.
I'll move the recommendation.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by Ung. Any further questions to approve the contract or approve the contract? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Next item, Mark, is approved.
Bridge J9.
That's the one. Project number J9.
This is for replacement of a bridge on 170th Street that was washed out during the June 2016 storm event. The low bidder on the project was Dixon Construction of Correctionville, Iowa. The contract for the replacement of the bridge is valued at $544,821.40. I recommend approval of the contract and bond.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Taylor, second by Ung. Any further questions for Mr. Nera? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item C, addressing gravel road improvement request. This is an information item. Would you like to start, Mark, or?
Sure. The board's heard a great deal of comment in the recent meetings as we've gone out and set our meetings in different communities in the rural area over the past couple of years. And one of the big topics, in addition to bridges, which we've been working to address, is the condition of our gravel roads. And in looking at our gravel road system, we've heard complaints about the quality of the gravel. We've looked at that as a department. We've worked to get better quality assurance checks in place And we think we're getting some of the best gravel we've had in recent years. But our problem isn't gravel quality as much as it is gravel quantity. 30 years ago, looking back in the records and the memories of our senior staff, the county used to go out and gravel every mile of road, all 938 miles every year. And they'd hit those with between 200 and 500 tons to the mile. We had a former sand hill right near the intersection of K67 and Old Highway 141 that gravelled much of that south part of the county for years. There's really no cost to us there any more than going in, scooping it up, and throwing it in a truck. We didn't have the quality control we had in place now back then, but we did have a lot more material that was going down the roads. Our surveyors, the late Roger Milligan in particular, would comment about how in the past we had 6 to 8 inches of gravel base on the road. Now we're down to 2 to 4 inches of gravel on the roads. That's a significant reduction in the load carrying capacity of the roads, and it's occurring at a time when we're seeing unprecedented heavy loads. The production of just corn in our rural areas has grown from the 1940s when these roads were improved and built. Back then, corn production was 45 to 50 bushels per acre. For the last 3 years, we've averaged over 200 bushels per acre. Just about every farm operation out there has a semi-truck, if not 2 or 3 straight trucks to go with it. We're seeing very heavy loads at a time when we've been putting less and less gravel on the roads. And it hasn't been for a lack of effort by our department, but each year we see our dollar buying less. In fiscal year 2002, we were able to buy 130,000 tons for $633,000. Last year, we bought about the same amount of gravel for $1.42 million. So our dollar is being eaten up by inflation. We're putting more and more to it, but we're getting less and less back. And if we really want to see better quality out there, we need to regain that gravel base and give ourselves something to work with and carry that heavy load that's out there. I gave all the board members a chart that shows, the blue line shows our contract price for the total contract, and then the red bars show how much gravel has purchased each year. And you can see that rising trend where we start around 600,000 and we're up to that 1.4 million level now for cost, but we haven't advanced the bar any to speak of on the amount that we're able to purchase with that. You can see that we even dipped in 2010, 2011, 2012, where we were buying much less gravel than we are now. 2016 was actually our lowest purchase year, where we barely made 100,000 tons. And to put that into context, we look at about 300 tons per mile as being our replacement value. And that's about what those roads were getting 30, 40 years ago. If we buy 30,000 tons less, that's 100 miles per year that isn't getting replacement gravel placed on it. At some point, we need to start looking at reversing that trend if we want to see improvement on those roads, whether we pick roads based on traffic or look to do the entire system. At some point in time, the only way that we're going to be able to reverse that is to be able to buy more gravel. We have the resources between the Breeze pit, the Little Sioux gravel pit, and the railroad gravel pit. We have a few million tons of product that's sitting in the ground, but getting it up there and getting it out on the roads is the next thing we need to do, and then to be able to begin to sustain that. You can see that we have put more on in the last couple of years, even at that higher expense. We've had more money in that period with that dime gas tax. We've dedicated a quarter of those revenues coming to the local budget to try and get that gravel out there. But again, we're only putting that 300 tons per mile on. We're getting about an inch in the center 10 feet of the road. That's not getting us anywhere near that 6 to 8 inch base that we need to replace when we're looking at 2 to 4. If you look at some of the roads that we've had complaints about, Mr. Thompson's is one, Ida Avenue between Old 141 and 325th Street. We had some fairly heavy rains. We had wheel ruts in that road that were 2 to 3 inches deep. If you think about it, we've only got 2 to 3 inches of gravel there. By the time we cut to the bottom of that wheel rut to begin to repair the road, we're down in dirt. We're not moving gravel. We're not into those wheel ruts anymore. We're actually mixing dirt with the gravel that we've got left up there. And this really helps accelerate that degradation process. If you review any of the manuals on taking care of gravel roads, what they recommend is that 6 to 8 inch base that we used to have. That gives 4 to 5 inches of load carrying area, and then 2 to 3 inches for that operator to work on maintaining smoothness, getting rid of washboard, and maintaining a quality ride on the gravels. So I think it's good that we're discussing this. This isn't something that we've gotten to overnight. This has been a problem that's been building over the last 30 years. 2010, that year, you can see that our gravel purchases dipped, was the year that we started reducing staff for a few years to help free up additional money to buy gravel. In 2010, we started by eliminating 5 full-time equivalents, one of which we still haven't replaced after Roger's been retired since 2011. So, you know, we've gotten by without that one position that was valued at over $100,000 in 2011 dollars. We replaced the motor grader operators, but in that period, we were able to free up about $300,000 per year that allowed us to chase that price index for a while. As Supervisors Ung and Taylor know, at a Farm Bureau meeting in 2015, the folks out in the rural area were noticing their roads weren't getting as much attention and asked the board to address that. So gradually over time, we've replaced those 4 maintenance positions, so we're getting those maintenance blade passes again. But, you know, again, that's a couple $100,000 that isn't there to put into gravel again. Personnel is the last place I want to go to find money. But, again, we're at loggerheads here to where if we really want to start making some improvements over the next few years, I think we have to start looking at some new revenue sources and opportunities to bring some money into this situation to make it better.
Mark, did you say 300,000 tons for replacement?
Back in 300 tons per mile is what we're putting down as replacement gravel.
Okay.
That's about what we need per mile per year. Our average road probably has a little over 100 vehicles per day on it. So just from dust, from throw off through snow removal, throw off from, you know, just the action of vehicles. If you stand on a gravel road and a semi go by, a lot of stuff gets kicked off into the ditch. And just to stay with that on replacement, that 300 ton per mile is just a good replacement value. We did that at smaller counties I worked at where we'd hit the roads every 3rd year, so they were getting about 100 tons per year. And that was in a place where I didn't have near as much traffic as I do on many of my roads here. I guess I'm open for questions. You know, we do see a little bit of growth in road use tax fund, but right now it's just barely growing at about 1% per year. We're keeping up with inflation on a lot of our expenses. We're keeping up right now with payroll costs, but we're really not seeing, after that first year where we got that big leg up and we were able to add bridge projects and we were able to add that $300,000 per year to gravel, now we're pretty flat on revenues again. So it's a matter of we're going to be able to keep going, but we're not going to be able to accelerate and improve. I think what we're going to be facing is just a gradual, we'll either tread water or lose a little more ground in the next decade if we don't start to do something to reverse covers this.
What causes contract price to go down? Does that even happen now?
I haven't seen a drop in contract price in the time that I've been here. Well, you can see what it is annually up on that chart.
I mean, in other counties that you, other engineers.
We've always been, we used to be able to count on about 3% growth per year in our road use tax fund revenues. And when that's applied across the board, you were able to kind of keep up with inflation. In fiscal years, I think it was roughly 2007 to about 2014, we were getting $4 million a year in road use tax funds. I mean, it was just flat over that period. Our property taxes were growing by less than $100,000 a year. Our local option sales tax, which is our third largest area, was growing by maybe $100,000, $150,000 a year. So when the biggest revenue stream we have, which is our road use tax fund, doesn't grow, the local sources, property tax and local option sales tax, weren't able to keep up with our increased costs. The construction index runs right now between 5 and 7% per year. And that reflects into the gravel program too. There's that much growth in cost. To drive down that price, a good deal of the price of a gravel plant moving in is mobilization. If we can put more on the ground to start with, we should be able to negotiate a better unit price. We get better prices when we're crushing concrete, for instance, when we do 4 piles than when we do 1 or 2.
Because of the mobility portion of it?
Right.
They bring it in once instead of 4 times?
Exactly. There's advantages to doing larger volume when you've got the equipment in here to do it. Hallett Materials, which is the company that's done our gravel going way back 40, 50 years, they only have 1 production plant now, so they move it from place to place to place. And, you know, each of those moves is costly. You're moving very large pieces of equipment, paying a permit fee for it, and then having to set it up. If they're in a gravel pit that doesn't have electricity, then they're setting up generators and everything to help work that along too. If they've got to de-water, it's a little more expensive as well. You'll see that when you see this year's gravel contracts. The Breeze pit is more expensive gravel than what we're getting out of the railroad pit because they have to de-water the pond to get a good material. Once you've got it de-watered, it would be nice to be able to pull 2 or 3 times as much at least out of there as what we're pulling now.
Any other questions for Mark?
Mark, how much additional gravel could your staff distribute without basically needing additional staff?
Well, what we've started to look at within the department is what would it take to get us back to that 6 to 8 inch base? And it would take us about 2,250 tons per mile. That's just about 2 million tons countywide to do our entire 930-mile road system. If we bit this off in a 9 to 10 year program, I think that would be achievable with our staff to be able to go out, get the roads prepped, do a ditch cleaning and shaping of those road surfaces is necessary to bring that up. And then, I mean, we would be doing work to get those roads ready. It would keep us busy fully during the summer in getting them prepped to get that gravel going. We've got some roads that are ready now that are still in relatively good shape. You know, we would have to pick and choose where we have some that are easy to prep, some that we have to spend a little more time on, and balance that out over a program. But we feel with our existing staff, getting the gravel in place isn't the problem. It's that initial purchase and then getting it hauled to the roads where it's needed. Our prices range from about $2 a ton mile for delivery for the very close hauls for the areas around Correctionville, Odo, down to Anthon that are close to that gravel pit, to over $7 a ton by the time you get it all the way over to Luton, and $8 a ton by the time you get it to most of Lakeport Township, which is the area around Winnebagus on the other side of I-29. You know, the trucks are a finite cost. If they can make 2 rounds an hour, that's better than 1 round in 2 hours. And that's what they run into as we get farther and farther west. And unfortunately, that kind of shows in our system too, because I've corrected this over the last 5 years, but we used to give every district the same amount of gravel. Well, districts 4 and 5, which are Odo and Hornick, have 50 more miles than what Mobile and Correctionville do. So they need roughly 20% more gravel in each of those 2 territories. We've fixed that balance over the last 4 or 5 years, but their roads are have still seen less gravel per mile than what some of the ones up north have been. And if you track our complaints, a lot of our complaints are in the south half of the county.
Well, I guess for the public good, we need the public to understand that we as a board are listening, we're looking at options, and we understand that there's a problem. And one comment the last town hall we had in Bronson was a guy, one of the people wanted assurances that we weren't going to start on the best road, and I thought, of course not, we're going to start on the worst road. So
we would propose to start on the roads with the highest traffic that need it first. You know, that need the work the most, that affect the most number of people, and you know, then we would really try to be strategic in what we pick to be the first roads. I think we'd want to get some out there if we ever are able to find money that would make a bigger impact initially. We want to be able to show people progress and show what a good road looks like. It's frustrating for all of us out there to be providing over a system that's slowly declining.
we didn't get her overnight. And
No, not at all.
any other questions for Mark? Thank you very much. Board of Supervisors, item 10. Mr. Taylor and I and Dennis Butler are looking at the funding potentials and desire to increase quality of secondary roads by new revenue and alternative means. During the last 4 years, the county board has reduced the levy rate. While there are 3 pressing needs, the courthouse, the LEC, and secondary roads, that have not had the care and attention necessary in some 3 decades. We cannot get there overnight, and this will take long-term planning to not only regain and recover the way the roads were 30 years ago, but able to maintain them as well. Mr. Butler or Jeremy, do you want to start with this, or who would be the best to explain it?
I have one correction in the memo. The 1 million tons really should read 2 million tons.
Okay.
That's the only correction I have on that. Either me or Jeremy or both.
I can give a little bit of the overview of our first page if then Dennis wants to kick off on.
Okay.
So a couple of the things that we talked about, and this is just to get the conversation going as a board. Mark obviously talked about 9 or 10 years time with the amount of, that the staff internally could handle, but also as we try to match up what taxpayers can handle, both through either a voluntary, so to speak, levy, if that would be the wish and the discernment, or through new revenue. So some of the ideas that we initially started talking about between our budget analyst and our engineer is not only the utilization over 10 years' time, but looking at what new revenues are going to come on board, and that's twofold. Oftentimes we talk about CF Industries. We do have obligations over the next 3 years when we talk about Dogwood and CF with our financial package, but looking at what potential new revenue comes online through CF, I think is important in 2 ways. One, there's revenue that's going to come after it goes through all the taxing bodies, of which we are one of them. But also, and Mark can explain this a little more, there's a minimum local effort that's going to be required, in which the amount of valuation that we have is going to demand of our rural taxpayers more dollars as well. So there's a schedule that can be shared as to what those dollars will look like as well. But I want to be cautious with this and just say this board passed the taxpayers' first resolution. We said that we were serious as a board about dedicating one out of every 2 tax dollars to property tax relief. And so in conversation a little bit with the TRC and others, I think that that is our first and foremost obligation. But if we can structure new revenue coming online in such a way as to utilize that, I think that that's something that we should look at. The other thing that we talked about, going down to number 4, is there's 2 increasing costs. One is going to be if we borrowed everything at one time through the use of TIF or other creative bonding, you have interest rates, obviously, that we'd have to take into account. If you don't, you have the rise of cost that increases. One of the things that I think we should talk about as a board is both of those are known. You're either going to pay interest or you're going to pay rising costs. However, I think that we should think about the fact that if we were to borrow all of this at one time, we would be obligating both the future board and we'd be obligating taxpayers who may have voluntarily taken on a levy. And after 5 years, if we're asking them to potentially revisit it, they may be obligated if we've borrowed it all up front. Another idea that we talked about, and speaking of the, a special levy, is the bridge levy. If we did what was done fully over 5 years' time, that generates $1.3 million annually. That would get us to about 25% of Mark's total costs. My understanding is that's not a voted on levy. That's not even a special levy per se. It was generated by having the consensus of rural areas and town hall meetings and so on. That was the desire of those folks. And so I think it behooves us to see if that's the desire again in the future. And so those were just some of the things internally that we looked at as potentially some guiding principles and a conversation starter, so to speak.
If I could offer just a little bit extra, one of the reasons we had that 1.3 million in levy capacity available is because we have our local option sales tax, 80% of which is dedicated to our department. For longer than I've been here, and I think longer than my predecessor was here, we've had that local option sales tax in place, and that's been used to buy down that minimum local levy. So what we have to do is we look at what our total valuation is in the rural and the cities. We multiply that times the maximum allowable levies that the state code allows us to get. We find out what that total is. We have to achieve 75% of that total. If we fail to get that 75%, we also lose dollar for dollar in road use tax fund dollars, an equivalent amount. This happened to Woodbury County when the tax freeze hit us. We lost $400,000 in property tax revenues and $400,000 in road use tax fund per year for the 3 years that property tax freeze was in place during the early 1990s. But what the local option sales tax, getting back to that, allows us to do is, if our total ability to raise revenue would result in $4 million, to meet state code requirements, we'd have to get $3 million to meet that 75%. If we have $2 million in local option sales tax revenue, then we only have to levy $1 million in property taxes. We could potentially levy that full $4 million. So we're, in that period, we're levying $3 million less than we have to, yet we're still meeting that code requirement because we have that local option sales tax money in place. What happens to us that we talked about today is that when the valuation of CF comes fully online, now that total potential that we can raise goes up. If CF is $500,000 or $500 million to our valuation, and our valuation goes from $1 billion to $1.5 billion, that means that the amount that we can raise through property taxes at the maximum between rural and general levy gets up to almost $7 million. Then when we go back to 75%, we're down to about $5 million. But we only have $2 million now, that same $2 million in local option sales tax to apply to help us buy that $5 million down. So this is where the potential for.
So you're, just to clarify, okay, is you're saying that as much of a blessing, and it is a blessing that CF Industries revenue is going to have, based on the total amount of valuation, we have to be at that 75% of minimum effort. Otherwise, we're going to lose dollar for dollar state road use tax fund.
That's correct.
And by doing that, we will essentially have to bring on about $2 million more online through that rural levy, essentially.
That's correct, yes.
So that's why one of the things, as that comes, we could look potentially, because it's such a stair-stepped approach on CF's revenue, that the first years 1 through 5 could be on the special levy, so to speak, and then that money will inevitably have to come through the rural levy, otherwise we'll lose out on road use tax fund. And that at that same time, that could be when that special levy would drop off, potentially.
Correct. It all comes out in the wash the same way. We're using that excess levy capacity we have in the rural levy in that first 5 years or 10 years, whichever the board would choose to do. And then as our required levy grows, the other one goes away. By the time you get out there, it's just shuffling numbers. The levy's still about the same point, but we wouldn't necessarily have to levy as high because it would be spread over more valuation. The CF property alone almost increases, well, it does increase our rural valuation by 50% when it reaches full value, comparing now to where it's going to be at in that future fiscal year. But it is a blessing and a curse from the point of view of that as that happens, that 75% levy gets bigger too. But the good things with that are we're not going to need more men and equipment to take care of the roads at that point. That'll be money that we'll be able to put into infrastructure to improve those roads once we get out there in the 20-year period. All our predecessors went through this in the late 60s, where initially they saw that money that allowed us to grow a 350-mile paved road system and take roads out of gravel back then, because we had the Port Neal plant, we had the Terra plant, all of that development that went on in that area that has since helped fund, and that's a third of our valuation, Dennis, in the rural area? Just in that tiny little area that's served by 18 miles of road has subsidized the other 900 miles of road for many years, 1,100 miles of road for many years. This will happen again, but initially there, 20 years out, there is going to be some increase in levy unless you're looking to give back road use tax fund money.
Last point, just so people out there hear us clearly, that is only though on this one line item, so to speak. There are other funds from CF Industries revenue that we can use that would more than offset some of those increases that are coming there.
Well, that's right.
I want to make sure people don't hear out there, well, because CF Industries is coming online, our taxes are going up, when our whole point of this is yeah, the rural valuation will inevitably make that go up based on our minimum effort on this, in this one pot.
Right.
But there's 4 other pots, so to speak, that can be used if we're judicious to offset that.
You're funding deputies, you're funding libraries, you're funding some of conservation, aren't you, out of the rural services?
Right, and there's other levies that are being made more full, and we can use that for dedicated property tax relief. I want to make sure the message out there is not.
Yeah, only looking at one picture, you
Right.
can say it's bleak, but when you look at what that revenue will do when you combine the entire rural levy, not just roads, but all the other funds and departments that you fund out of that, those you may only have to levy half to do the same work that you do now. The increase in the minimum may be offset by decreases in what it costs to fund those other areas, if you don't grow those personnel, equipment, et cetera, any more than you grow us.
Well, and this is shifting back away from the money side of it, but those 2 times you and I went out and looked at the roads and different areas, like you said, Ida, and forgive me, I don't remember the other road between Smithland and Hornick, but it just looks to me like the less maintenance, the less attention these roads get, the faster they deteriorate.
Exactly, yes.
And I think we're at a tipping point where the quality of the roads is, we just can't afford to let these roads get any worse, or it's going to be.
The longer we let them go, the more it's going to cost to get them back up to where they need to be.
The 20% of local option sales tax that the board dedicates to economic development, I think in years past, with the board's support of the comprehensive plans, our hope was that that money could be built up and support meaningfully or match different projects in the rural communities. But with this necessity to raise this additional minimum effort, I realize it's more of a process to change that, but the board has in the past dedicated up to, I believe, $500,000 to the special bridge levy through that 20%.
Yes, you did.
Is it time for the board to consider a more stable commitment from that 20%? And are there other counties you know of that actually contribute 100% of local option sales tax to the road?
I know that was, Lynn County did a referendum a few years back where 100% of that penny went to the road department. They had it on for, I think it was 5 years. But at Delaware County, where I worked before I came here, the entire local option sales tax was dedicated to the secondary road fund.
Because I won't.
It depends on what each county chooses to do with that money. There's, I don't know how many have local option sales tax, but many of those that do have different places where they go with that money. But I have experienced at least 2 where all of it went to the road department to fund projects of value to those taxpayers there.
Because I wouldn't say the board uses it for pet projects. I mean, certainly we use it for some departments.
Nothing frivolous, no.
Right, but it is in a way discretionary, and we do support, as we have in the past, things like the Expo Center and different good ideas of economic development, but
that would help.
it's not the best use of our effort to build up this little 20% for these economic development projects, or is this the only way we can start this without raising tax rates?
It would definitely help buy it down for a couple of years. After we took another look at figures today, I haven't had really chance to plug in and see what the impact of that would be, but it's a number we could look at and report back.
To Supervisor Ung's point, if I may.
Go ahead.
Which is a good idea. After, Dennis, do you know, after planning and zoning, which we fund out of that, correct?
Correct.
Economic development, we've kind of merged those departments. After that, is there much discretionary left, or are we, do you know what we have, or are we sort of winnowed that down, or could that be?
Actually,
What's I don't want to call it
this fiscal
fluff.
year, we had carryover funds.
We did budget approximately $800,000 worth of expenditures with those excess funds, or carryover, not a carryover funds, and the current allocation of 20%. Now, as we burn these funds down, which we only got 66,000 left of unallocated funds in local option, when we burn these down, we have no carryover, so we have 848,000 and at 20%, we're gonna have to figure out what we're gonna do. We fund the Economic Development Department out of that. We fund soil conservation, county fair, rural housing. I have a list of about 8 different things, and the Expo Center for 150,000. So eventually, even though we can't build anything up because we have more expenditures going out than we're taking in.
To Supervisor Young's point, do we have anything dropping off, for example, on the rural comp plans or things that are one-time expenses
No.
of that, or they're ongoing?
Most of these are expenditures we've done for the last several years. So it's going to come to a point, even with that, we can't use any of that 20% at all.
You said there's 848,000?
Obligated this year,
Obligated, but
this year.
approximately how much every year is that?
We probably get 400, well, of that, about 600,000,
And the cost of the combined department is approximately,
298,000. Plus another 150 for the Ag Center, so now you're up to 430,000, which is basically what we take in local option. Then we have other things like the fair, the soil conservation, Simcoe, we have several things, so to use that 20% really isn't even an option. Or, this is the bad thing, we can move the Economic Development Department, fair, soil, a lot of these back to rural basic, but then you're increasing taxes. So you're going to increase on this side and free up this money to help build a fund up, or keep it going this way and not increase the rural basic fund. That's our options with rural basic. It's a complex issue. But we've done this for years with our economic and zoning, and the fair and the soil conservation hold the line on taxes. Next year we won't have this, cash reserve to carry over.
I just don't know if
IJR.
I just don't know if it should build up. We have gaming revenues that we
Gaming revenue you can use for.
We do build up and we do use for different projects.
Yes.
Things that come up in the middle of the budget year, but I'm not sure that obligating 800,000+ one year and a different amount next year for picking and choosing these different things to use the lost funds for and always coming up with change is beneficial over the years, or should we devote that change to this problem?
This year, we're using up all the change. We have 66,000 left that's unobligated to last us the rest of the year for anything to come up that could potentially be local option sales tax expenditures. Next year in 20, we're going to have to look at that 800 or 600 and trim that down so we don't spend more than we're taking in. That's something we're going to have to look at.
We are going to have some growth, though, in lost funds over the next, I know it won't outstrip, but we're going to have growth, too,
Yeah.
because of CF.
Talking with Department of Revenue, I've talked to a gentleman down there I've known for years, and he's pretty honest and upfront. He anticipates our local option sales tax to go up to 2-3% this year, 2 to 3% this coming year when they come out with the new estimates.
So maybe to Supervisor Young's point, the things that we know are ongoing, the fair, the departments, et cetera, maybe it's, once this thing sort of settles itself out and we can meet, obligations to expenditure, then maybe those new dollars, we're looking for every margin we can get, and I don't think that's a bad point if we look at that as a way as well.
And 3% of 400, say 400,000, only $12,000. It's not a whole lot of money. We had a couple good years where CF was here. They spent a lot of money. That went away, and everybody, including ourselves, and the city, and every business in Woodbury County and associate counties felt it when they left. Because if you take 5,000 employees out, it's going to hurt somewhere.
But Mark projects $20,000 worth of growth to local option sales tax annually over the next 20 years. That's
at 1%. If we go up 2 or 3, you get 40 or 60,000 a year.
But that's every year that's cumulatively.
He's being conservative 1%, which I'd rather be conservative than overestimate, and here we spent it all and now we don't got it.
Yeah, prior
prior to that CF project, that's about what we were seeing was 1%. And, you know, not having a big project like that going in the county right now, I guess that's why I kind of went back to that 1%. But, I mean, we could project out at 2 to 3%. It makes some difference, but we're still going to have that eventual increase in the rural levy come along at that date 20 years in the future. It might not just be quite as big as what I was projecting.
Only if you can guarantee your projections will come true.
Yeah, I wish I could. Well, that's guaranteeing that we continue to have growth.
Well, that's why projections should be more conservative, so they don't jump up to bite you.
I'd rather underpromise and overdeliver.
Absolutely.
There's one other one, AGP.
AGP, we gave them a 7-year total exemption. I'm not sure what their minimum assessment was. I thought it was like 20, 30 million at least, because a lot of, you know, it costs $2 billion to build CF, but you don't tax machinery, equipment, 'cause that's all tax exempt anyway, so we're building just on structure, assessments, and land. So 7 years, and I think we're through either the first or second year, so 5 years down the road, we'll pick up another 20, 30 million in taxable value.
See, that's what I think is important for our board, is to have this 10-year, at least plan, even if we, you know, funding it at pay-as-you-go, and instead of, you know, we don't look past our nose and we see the crack in the windshield, and yet we hope it doesn't grow any bigger, you know, to be able to project out, okay, here's AGP, here's a conservative local option sales tax growth, here's the minimum local effort that's going to be required, you know, here's some of these other things that we can cobble together, you know, to get back to where we need to be.
Well, I don't think anybody on the board is very interested in raising taxes enough to pay for this, nor borrowing the money to do it either, so I think we just have to find the most responsible way to tackle it without letting it get any worse.
On the gravel portion of it, we got two portions really. One is to buy the gravel. We don't have to buy it, but we have to pay to crush it, to dig it out of the ground. 2 million tons is about $10 million. The two options are we buy it or do it all up front, stockpile it, borrow the money, or figure out how much it's going to cost with inflation to do it year by year and figure out which way do we come out the best route. Now I estimated 10 million at 4%, potentially it might go down to 3%. When we go 5, 10, 15, 20 years, every 5 or 10, 15 you go up, it's going to increase your interest rate because the bank is looking toward the long-term planning there again. They're going to protect themselves, and I can't blame them. So what I did, I went through this, and I don't know if you want me to go through this or not. The options are potential, and they aren't categorized by preference. They're just options available. Because some of the options are doable, and some aren't. Some require, you know, to expand our increment district. I explained that. Some require, some don't require a referendum. Some do require a referendum, a reverse referendum if we're petitioned. Anytime you use TIF revenue for a major project, for a bond issue, it does require a potential reverse referendum, which we've never had ever. In the 46 years I've been here, we've never had that. Of course, we've never looked at something this major either, but I highly doubt that, and so is our bonding attorney. If we use a debt service, there is no referendum required, and there is no reverse referendum when you're using strictly debt service. So if we use urban renewal, the things you gotta remember, to use it on county roads, we'd have to amend our urban renewal plan, include every county road and the right-of-ways in our plan. So if you took a map here, we'd have the map here, then you have the spider web going through the whole county. That's the only way you can use any TIF revenue outside the TIF district. So that's to keep in mind there on that little issue. But taxation, and I also want to remember in some of these options, does say tax the cities. We have never taxed the city, as far as I know, levied against the general fund.
I haven't gone as far back as I was.
And I've been here a lot of years, and we've never done that because we've always been below the 70. We've always levied the minimum levy, never levied anymore. And when local option came in, you know, we got potential revenue we could generate from additional tax rates on the rural people, but we haven't done that in the past.
When you use debt service, does each of those funds pay it back? In other words, you're not just using debt service to be paid back, all
Debt service,
taxpayers are.
that'd be part of the plan, or options I have, where we have different areas reimbursing debt service fund to make the debt service payments. It's a combination of potential TIF, combination of levy against the cities, levy against the townships. There's a lot of options here. It's pretty complex, because we're talking a 10-year span here. But the gravel, first, I think we should sit down potentially, if this is something we want to proceed with a little bit and get more information, is are we saving money by buying up front, or does it cost each year? You know, with inflation and everything, is it going to cost us more? Is it going to cost us $200,000-300,000 more, or is it going to cost us more to borrow the money? And, you know, with inflation.
I don't think with the graph it's possible for it to be a better price down the road.
No, the graph we had up.
For interest rates, I mean, I can't see it getting to that 5% construction increase. Would the interest rates be locked in any way, Dennis?
Interest rates would be locked, just like on all of our loans are locked. One year we had it where we're made variable, but in the future and in the past, we had variable. We lock them in.
You can basically guarantee it would be locked in at a rate below 5 to 7%.
Yes, yes. Also, when we have these options here, that does not include the cost of hauling and spreading it. So you got 10 million potentially for 2 million tons, and the other cost is spreading it. And that could be up to another 15 million. Maybe after how we're paying for it.
Staff do that, or are you gonna pay a contractor?
Our staff would be pretty well engaged on doing, if we were doing a program that big. If we did not, if we looked at the whole 938 miles, our staff would be fully engaged getting roads ready and then spreading the material, getting it prepped so it stays there on the road. We would have to contract the hauling. We have 1 semi-tractor with a belly dump and 9 tandems. For next year, for our much smaller gravel road program, we'll be hauling everything to districts 3 and 4. We feel we can do better with using our own trucking on that.
What are 3 and 4 again?
That's Odo and Correctionville.
Okay.
Those are the cheap hauls right now when we contract trucking. But on a program as large as what we're talking here, where we're looking at doing 100 miles a year, we can't haul and prep the roads, not with our current staff load. Our staff level, we would look at just doing that road prep and then the placement of the gravel with somebody else hauling it to us.
And the 15 million is an estimate. Depends how much his people can do and how much we'd have to contract out. 10 million is kind of a fixed number. And I guess we're very, very fortunate. We did do what the board did, buy some property with a lot of gravel on it. And that saves us going out and try to buy the gravel and bring it in. Because that gets very expensive if you've got, what do you say, quartz, limestone?
One of the comments that we received at a couple of the meetings was bring in either the quartzite material, which comes out of South Dakota. It's brought by rail to Sioux City. That's $25 per ton sitting in the yard there at Sioux City. Then we have the haul rate on top of that. The same project that we're looking at, if we do all the roads, we're looking at just shy of $26 million to do all of the roads and get that 6 to 8 inches of gravel base back. It would cost $67 million if we used quartzite. If we brought up limestone from Harrison County, which is the nearest limestone quarry, we'd be looking at about $69 million. So our local aggregates are a much better buy, and we own that material. We have millions of tons of reserves between Railroad Pit, the Little Sioux gravel pit between the park and the Breesey Pit. We even have a little bit left in Peters if we really work hard and go after it and put up with the amount of bleed that we're pulling out of there. By bleed, I mean the amount that's sand that we separate out from the aggregate.
I agree with Supervisor Ong on probably the amount that we're going to pay on interest would be less. Here's my only worry. If we heard out in the rural areas, 82% of people said, yeah, absolutely, we'll do this for 5 years. That generates $6.5 million, about 25% of what this thing would take. If you go ahead and you borrow $25 million at the end of the 5 years, those payments are still going to be due, and you've got to be able to tax somebody for them. My worry is you're not asking at the end of that 5 years. You're saying we've got to somehow, we're in this for the long haul. And even if we got, to that 25%, and people said, you know what, let's stop, we're still a lot further ahead than we are right now. Even if we don't get to 6 or 7 inches and we get to 1 3/4 or 2, it's a lot better than we've been doing. So I think that's just one thing that we should keep in our thought process on this as well.
Well, if we do solicit meaningful feedback, then if it is really just a conversation and an agreement that the 5 years would be levied for bridges, then it could be in the same way that we have a consensus to go ahead with the borrowing, which would have a lesser impact on the rates. I mean,
As long as they knew you're not really doing a 5-year, you're probably, by doing this and allowing us, you're doing something for 20.
sure.
Or, until we can get to this bridge
It's
to
that dollar
CF.
amount, it wouldn't
Right.
necessarily cover. If we have another storm, then it would knock a year off.
And I think rather than throwing a smaller amount at the whole system, we'd really be better off to target a smaller part of the system. We have some areas that we know are difficult for us, where we have large farm operations, large cattle operations, where we have higher traffic because of rural development. It might be 25% of our roads that we want to take and inject the highest level of effort into, and then maybe do less on some of those others. But at some point, that's a decision that we can work through. Again, we've been a long time getting here. I'm not necessarily expecting we're going to have a plan to get ourselves fully out of it, even in this budget year. And part of what we might need to do is to do a smaller bit and show the success, show people what those good quality gravel roads look like, and then see if there's more of that willingness to pay for it. But I think we'd be better off, especially on those high traffic, heavy hauled roads, we would probably be money better spent to take care of them first. And I think our staff knows where those are at well enough that we could work with the board, pick some of those and get them improved. It's another thought. If you feel we're biting off too much, and then as CF is fully online and we're looking at that extra $2 million in revenue a year, our successors are really going to have a lot of ability to make major improvements in our infrastructure when that comes up.
All right, I got a few questions to burn through here. How many miles of gravel do we have?
938. It's the current inventory.
All right. What's the average width?
Average width on those is probably 26 feet.
Okay, that's pretty wide.
Again, the 2250 we're looking at is taking care of roughly that center 20 feet.
Sure.
Where the traffic is,
Right.
outside that shoulder.
Just kind of washes off anyway. Yeah. Most people drive in the middle anyway. Mm-hmm. Do we keep a 2% or 4% grade typically, or crown?
4% is what our target crown is, and that's our target minimum.
Okay.
There are some roads where we do carry closer to a 5 to 6.
Okay, and then, typically like 80% of your system might only be like 100 or 50 car per day or something, a real low traffic count. Would we be 25% probably a higher traffic count on the gravel?
That'd probably be pretty close, yeah. And it's at 60 to 75 and up area that is really the
higher
heavier, yeah.
Okay.
The bulk of our really heavy traffic is where we have the large storage operations, the large feed operations, the rural businesses. Most of our roads take the harvest pretty well. Everything's dry. You're not dealing with frost. It's knowing where those storage areas are, where we have people that have to get their crop out to market in the spring. those are the roads that we really have to look at to try and get bulked up. And then the ones with heavy traffic, whether it's residential or caused by the large storage or feed operations.
So some of these issue areas, are they because of water drainage or lack of shoulder or high shoulder?
Occasionally, but that's something before we put the investment in gravel that
You're going to
we would
fix the
address.
shoulder first, yeah.
We would re-ditch. It would be similar to what we did on Ida Avenue between Old 141 and 325th. We went out there, we ditched that, we got it back to the proper road top width.
Now, do you have staff that does that?
Yes.
Or- Okay.
Yeah, we have staff in each, we have an excavator in each district for the ditch cleaning. We have, for larger projects, where we might need to do a spot regrade, we have two scrapers and two dozers that assist with that work.
I guess personally, I don't think I'd support any current proposal on any of this. My preference would be maybe targeting maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 miles worth of road, sticking in about, a 3-inch or maybe a 4-inch type of, booster in that area or whatever base addition in that area, because you're going to have certain patches in certain areas. You're not going to have 40 miles of a road that's terrible, at least from what I've driven.
I think we've got a lot of miles out there that are in pretty tough shape, and we need to get them.
Yeah,
We need to do everything we can to get.
when we get a 3-inch rain, we start to look bad in some
Right.
areas. When I started out in this job, and granted, I wasn't on this end of the state, I was on the other end of the state, but, they're seeing some of the same issues that we are. And we didn't used to see black coming up through the gravel in the midsummer when we get 5 or 6 inches of rain in a 2-week period.
This year was kind of an extra rainy year, was it not? Especially spring.
I don't know that we're about, I'd have to check.
We're the 17th wettest in Iowa history. Sorry to get into nerd world, but
Yeah, we're kind of, I can check that to see where we're at accordingly, but again, when you get down to that 2 to 3 inches of remaining gravel out there, we're not even giving the guys enough to work with, to blade, to build a proper crown. But if they can do it in that 2 to 3 inches of gravel that's left, there isn't anything that's really helping support those loads. And I think the reason this is all coming to a head is because we are seeing so much more farm productivity. We're seeing many more truckloads coming out of the rural area. And I think that's what's bringing a lot of the outcry. That's countywide. You can cover the entire county with a shotgun, and we know that every 160-acre field is bringing out roughly 3 to 4 times what it did when its roads were built. But I think we're getting toward where we're hitting pretty much bottom. We've got to start turning that around a bit and try to regain some structure back out there so that we don't end up having to spend even more if we wait 20 more years to start improving this.
We got a lot of work to do. We've got some options to look at. Mr. Butler.
The inevitable fact is, we've only been talking about the farmers. We have school buses out there, we have emergency vehicles out there, we have a lot of other people besides the farmers using the roads. We're getting more and more housing developments out there, people are moving out of the county, they're using more of our paved roads, but they're also using more of our gravel roads too. So we need to have it halfway safe, not only for the farmer, but school bus full of kids, an ambulance running down the road, of our deputy sheriff's driving down the road. There's a lot of factors to consider here, and it's a major, major thing besides whatever else we got on our platters. This is major. It's never been done before. What, 100 years we've been here, Woodbury County? It's never been done. So it's something new, but something the board has a chance to be aggressive on. It's a tough decision. But we got a lot of options here, but first we got to decide what we want to do.
Thank you, Dennis. Any other questions for Mark or Dennis, board discussion?
I'd just make one comment. When we talked about maybe putting a less down, if we're going to do anything, I don't want to do a Band-Aid. You know, it's
Been going on for 30 years.
Yeah, if we decide to just do less miles, whatever we do, and I like what you said, if we're going to take some roads, let's make them good roads, and that way we can show it, and then maybe we get more support to do more. But I think if we go out and put, 1.5 to 2 inches on it, and throw a Band-Aid at it, we're not going to be able to show that off.
I don't think so.
When it gets to a certain level, Mark, does the blading actually harm the road?
When you get down so low, I don't think it harms the road. Yeah, you've got to maintain ride. You have to try and maintain drainage. If you drive some of our roads that are down in the bottom, and by bottom I refer everything that lays kind of southwest of Old Highway 141, some of those roads down there are less than 2 inches of gravel on them. They're still listed as gravel roads, but they don't look much different than some of our dirt roads. Nobody lives down there. They're basically farm access roads, maybe 1 or 2 residences on some of them, so they don't suffer too badly, because the only time they're seeing heavy loads is in the fall when they're the most stable. But at a certain point, you don't hurt it anymore. You still need to do what you can to shed the water that's falling on them with rain, and to maintain that minimum traffic level, because they do tend to washboard more than the roads that have that gravel and that strength of the base on top of that subgrade.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, Mark and Dennis. Good questions. Item 11, Board of Supervisors, Mr. Taylor, approval of a letter from the board to each crew member of the USS Sioux City.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You all, and I guess I should say we all have been supportive as a board of the USS Sioux City, which I think is a great thing, and very exciting that in November they're going to have the actual commissioning, which has been a very long process, and I think they've been overwhelmed with this community support. So this would be a letter from our board, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. I just want to highlight the first couple of paragraphs, kind of set the stage. So on July 18th, it was this community's privilege to host retired Navy Rear Admiral Frank Thorpe, who was an outstanding representative of the USS Sioux City. I believe he was in a certain parade, maybe with Mr. Potabon, and during that time. And Admiral Thorpe said that he was overwhelmed by the support in the community, and the response was, "I wish we could do more," and asked to have him convey on the county's behalf that all service personnel aboard the craft ought to know that we're behind them. And we, of course, met them here in the courthouse previously, and he told me if those sentiments would want to be expressed, he would certainly carry those forward. So this letter is an attempt to let them know that we have many great units here in our community. Sometimes we even send someone to the coast as well, though we don't have any naval reserve here in town. Our courthouse and our people in our community have answered that call and answered the call to be behind them. And so this is a hope that we could all sign this collectively as a way to let them know that their sacrifice and what they're doing daily for the country and for this community is appreciated. So with that, I was hoping that we could sign collectively.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ung, second by Radig to approve the letter from the Board of Supervisors to each crew member of the USS Sioux City. Further comments?
When do we think this would be delivered?
I think as soon as we could get it signed and copied, and I think our Chris McGowan would probably be helpful in delivery of that.
Signing here?
I think we'll maybe have it reformatted. And
okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Item 12, reports on committee meetings.
Not exactly a committee, but I did take up an invitation from the sheriff's office to look at the full body scanner earlier today. My understanding is it's already, in the 2 weeks it's been installed, already seen 3 incidents, you could call them, or things inside people's bodies, you could also say. So
That didn't belong there?
that didn't belong there.
Wow.
It's saw some of the scans, and you actually have to look at quite a few, I think, to actually know just right off the bat what's off. And so it's a good deterrent, and it's also, a service to other counties when we transfer inmates, and it's also good for when things are brought in or delivered. So the sheriff's office was very appreciative, as you all know.
Mr. Potabom.
I just wanted to let you know the 3rd Judicial District Board that I serve on, Mr. Scholl is retiring after 40-some years with the Department of Corrections. So we are interviewing applicants in October to hopefully have a new person on by the first year so they can work with him for 3 months. But hopefully it'll stay as long as he did, because he's been there he's been there since Lynn Hall left, so.
Very nice. Mr. Reddick?
No.
We good? Second round of citizen concerns. Any board concerns?
One, Mr. Chair. Sure. A comment. I'm very, very appreciative for staff doing all the cooking and prepping and serving and everything. That we've got a great staff of 400 some odd employees, so it was a good thing, I think, today.
We had a lot of them.
Sorry I ended up missing it too. I enjoyed that last year, but
We missed you.
yeah, well, hoping the guy who called in sick makes it tomorrow morning so I can be at the WCICC meeting.
And one last concern.
Sure.
September 20th, we need to see if there's going to be a majority at the pork producers and or the chamber dinner. So just something.
Planning on attending the chamber dinner.
Oh, I'm not,
Either? Neither one?
no.
Mr. Which?
Oh, no, it's chamber dinner.
Okay.
Chamber dinner.
I think I'm at the chamber dinner, so if we want to publish.
Anything else? We are adjourned.
We have WCICC.
What's that?